Thank you very much for the introduction, Ines. Hi, everyone. So, before I start, I want to tell you that I'm very well aware that I'm the only obstacle between you and lunch, so I'll try to make my best to make this talk as interesting as I can possibly do, and if not, at least I'll try to make it short. So, today, I would like to talk to you about code review assignments and how they can be a powerful tool that you can use to improve both the efficiency and the effectiveness of your hiring process for hiring software engineers. So before I jump into telling you about how you can use code review assignments, I would like to take a bit of a step back and talk to you about the context for my talk. And I would like to start with one question. How do you evaluate the software engineering skills of candidates that you want to hire? Well, in my view, there are really two main ways that you could possibly try to evaluate the skills of candidates. One is live coding sessions, in which candidates perform some simple coding challenge in the presence of their interviewer, and they're evaluating on that. And the second one is take-home coding assignments, where candidates are handed a larger coding task that they have to complete at home in their own time, and then this is typically followed up by an interview with your interviewer, in which we'll discuss the output of your assignments. For the sake of completeness, there is also another option, in my view, that is the one that involves reviewing the portfolio of the candidates. However, I would not really include it as one of the viable options, because this requires candidates to have open source contributions or having made enough personal projects that are willing to share with you and you can evaluate. But unfortunately, there are tons of really excellent candidates who really don't have a lot of open source contribution. So this is not really, I think, a viable options that you can use to evaluate your candidates. So really, it leaves us with two options, the live coding assignments and the take-home, live coding sessions and take-home coding assignments. Now, I think I'm quite confident I'm not saying anything controversial if I state that neither live coding sessions nor take-home assignments are really great tool for evaluating the skills of software engineers. And hopefully, I would like to spend the next two slides to convince you about that. Live coding sessions are actually good tools if you want to evaluate candidates quickly. They are very time efficient for both candidates and interviewers, because you can really complete this session in the 45 minutes, 1 hour, 1 hour and a half. And since they're actually time efficient, you could also use it very early on in your hiring process at technical screening stage. However, I think that the advantages of live coding sessions really end here. There are a number of problems related to them. I think the real main challenge of coding session is that these really evaluate the candidates under a really artificial environment that is not representative of the day-to-day work of software engineer. So normally during live coding sessions, candidates don't have access to reference material. They cannot use search engines. They cannot use sometimes they cannot use their favorite editor. And sometimes they cannot even use a computer at all. They are forced to do the assignments on a whiteboard, which is not reflective of how the normal day-to-day job of a software engineer is. Another problem related to that is that the candidate's emotional response during the interview affects their performance. Now, I don't know how you code in your company, but I imagine you don't normally code with a person breathing on your neck that you need to impress in 1 hour, knowing that your career and your financial future may depend on your ability to impress the person. I don't think that's something that you normally do on a day-to-day basis. And so the candidates being under pressure to impress their interviewer may actually end up compromising the results. Another issue is that since you can only have up to 1 hour or 1 hour and a half to evaluate the candidates, you necessarily can only give candidates a small enough coding challenge. And you cannot really test how the candidates deal with thinking about larger problems, how they organize complex systems, how they define interface about components. And as a result, the interview ends up overly focused on correct syntax and coding speed, which I would argue are not the most important things. You really miss out more important aspects, like, again, as I said, like how the candidate can think through larger pieces of code. So take-home assignments really solve some of the problems that live coding sessions have, but in the process they introduce a whole new host of problems. So one thing that take-home coding assignments are good at is evaluating candidates under realistic work conditions, because candidates have access to search engines, reference material, they can do the things at home in the quiet, using their favorite editor. It also gives the opportunity to assess candidates using larger scale code than typically during live coding sessions. However, the big disadvantage of using take-home coding assignments is really that they're really time-consuming for candidates. And this is really a bad feature, not only because it frustrates candidates, but also has a substantial repercussion for employers as well. The main problem is that these increase the risk of candidates dropping out of the process. So we heard today from Tara early in the morning how important it is to try to hire the best people that are the best fit for your team. And giving candidates very time-consuming tasks results in candidates that got maybe several interviews lined up, or candidates who got caretaking responsibility, or candidates who got a very busy schedule, to more likely drop out of the process. So you're missing out on potentially really good candidates, which is a problem. Another problem is also this leads to a poor candidate experience. If you make a candidate go through several hoops, they need to spend a lot of time, and they don't receive an offer, that can be very frustrating. They may be upset about the process, might not be applying in the future, not consider you as an employer anywhere in the future. And it's clearly something that we don't want to do. We don't want to have candidates that leave without an offer to really resent having been gone through the process and wasted their time without getting anything in return. So these processes are also time-consuming for interviewers as well, not only for candidates, because interviewers also need to spend time reviewing code produced by candidates, which takes a substantial amount of time. There are things, and we talked about AI today, and I'm going to talk about AI again, is that if you give assignments to candidates which are simple enough, these are something can be really effectively completed by AI, large language models. And on the other hand, if you give candidates a more complex problem, you really exacerbate the problem of the assignments being more complex. And also, candidates may sometimes feel that you might be using them as a free labor, which is very illegal. I'm sure that your legal counsel say absolutely not do it. And even if you don't do it, you don't really want candidates to even think that you maybe potentially do this kind of thing. So you cannot win, If it's too easy, AI can do it for you. If it's too complex, it takes more time for candidates, and they may feel being exploited, which is something that we don't want. And finally, I will also say that this is a type of assignments where the interview subjectivities affect the evaluation of candidates. So especially if you are running these assignments using languages that allow, that are not very opinionated and allow to have different idiomatic solutions for the same problem, how do you compare it, different equally valid solutions? So some bias, some personal preference interviewer can actually play a role in how candidates are evaluated. So hopefully by now, I was able to persuade you on how live coding sessions at take-home assignments are really not a great tool for running software engineer. But I think an important question becomes that, can we actually do better than that? I'm actually reasonably confident from my experience that we can. And I think that in most circumstances, giving code review assignments to candidates are a better option to evaluate their skills that overcomes the major limitation that both live coding sessions and take-home assignments have. And let me try to explain you why. So first of all, what are these code review assignments? Well, the process is very simple. These candidates are given a take-home assignment, but instead of having to write code from scratch, they're given an existing piece of code that compiles work, and their job is to review that piece of code, as they would normally do, for example, in their job if a peers of theirs ask them to review their code. They submit this code review, and then this is typically followed up by an interview with an interviewer where the review of the candidate is discussed. So I'm not claiming any originality on this, and this is an idea that's been around. GitLab, I know, famously has used them for a while. And I'm also familiar, or at least one case of a company that is building a SaaS tool for actually facilitating the delivery of this code review assignment. But so even if I'm not claiming originality, the problem I see is that this is really not a very commonly used approach. So from our interview that through the candidates I interviewed most recently, that went through this process, they told us that this was the only time they did the code reviews. And I'm going to make the argument in this talk that this should be a more commonly used approach than it is now, and should probably be, I think, the best approach in most circumstances. So what are the advantages, actually, of using code review assignments? So to start, I think that this is a process which is relatively time efficient for both candidates and interviewers. So it still requires candidates to have a take-home assignments. However, reviewing existing code takes substantially less time than writing code from scratch. So if you want to evaluate candidates and how to reason about a very large code base, reviewing existing code is the most time-effective way to do that. Second thing is that this also allows to evaluate candidates under realistic work conditions, because they can use their favorite editors, they can do it at home, have access to search engine and reference material. So that's more representative of the work of candidates. And also, this is something that allows a very objective evaluation of candidates from interviewers. So once you create your assignments, you can really create a checklist of what you expect the candidates to identify, what is your criteria for their acceptance criteria, and really evaluating the review of a candidate, just basically go against this checklist, check if the candidate identified the issues that you expect them to identify and what they miss and so on. So this requires a very quick, mechanical, and objective evaluation of assignments, unlike evaluating the output of live coding sessions or take-home coding assignments, which have more room for subjective judgment of your interviewer. Finally, I would like to say that these approaches come with two very interesting byproducts. One is that this is something that also allows you, as a side effect, to evaluate the written communication skills of candidates, which especially in a post-COVID world, where most teams now are remote and distribute, becomes a quite crucial skills to evaluate. So if you work in a team that is distributed, chances are that written communication makes up most of the communication that you have around. And finally, this also gives you, unlike live coding sessions and take-home coding assignments, where candidates had to write code from scratch, candidates are required to be successful in these assignments to really understand existing code to the point they're able to debug and understand the issues. Now, I would say that this is something that is a very important skill, because in most organizations, for most engineers, being able to review, evolve, understand, maintain existing code is part of their job. But this is going to be even more and more crucial, in my opinion, as we heard from Iwer, when AI, large language model, will make more space in the development process. So as AI gets more into the development process, candidates, software engineers' ability to debug and understand existing code become more and more important. And so this is something that already allows you to hire candidates already show ability to understand and debug existing code written by machines or other people. So let me talk to you a bit about the experience of my group at Fastly. So we used code review assignments for the last two openings in the network control and optimization group, which is the group that I got the privilege of being serviced to. And so far, the two candidates who were hired are doing really, really well. Now, I don't have enough data to claim any causal relationship between using code review assignments and having hired excellent candidates, but at least we don't have any negative correlation, which makes me a bit confident. However, the real reason why I decided to come here today and talk to you about that is the feedback that we received from candidates. We received exceedingly positive feedback from them. They made me very confident. They told us that this was a more humanizing process. They felt that it was much less stressful than coding interviews. They also felt that we were more respectful of their time compared to having coding review assignments. And one of the things that also made me happy to see is that the candidates felt that even if the interview did not end up in them receiving an offer, this process made them learn something. So they received some good feedback from the interviewer. They learned things that they missed. So at least they walked away with something. And this makes me, and while I think that we need to take with a grain of salt candidates from feedback from candidates, as they might feel a bit reluctant sharing some critical feedback with the company interviewing them. I also feel that some of this feedback, since was unprompted, that didn't come from any question, gives me confidence that overall candidates had a better experience using code review assignments as part of their process. So the process that we used specifically was very simple. We gave the candidates code to review after the initial screening and before the final stage. So even if I think the code review assignments are generally quite time effective, this still requires some amount of effort for candidates. So we didn't feel it was appropriate to be given at the taking a screening, and this is something they only did after the final stage. So we sized the pull request in such a way that would take at most 2 hours to complete, according to our best estimation. But we try to give candidates as much time as they wish, and we make sure that everyone at least had a few days to complete the pull request review, which made me so to make sure that they have enough time and to complete the review and allocate enough time. We ask candidates to submit the review at least 1 day before the interview, so that the interviewer can review data and prepare questions for the interview. And then this is concluded by a 60 minutes interview where basically interview and candidates discuss the work of the candidate together. Talking about the pull request specifically, the pull request, in this specific role, we were looking for people that already had previous experience in Go, and we create a self-contained pull request of around 300 lines of code in Go, which we intentionally pepper with bugs, anti-pattern, and generally bad design decisions and questionable implementation decisions. By being self-contained, candidates really only had to understand these 300 lines. They did not have to do any extra work trying to understand how other code works. And the subject of the pull request was actually a simplified version of a problem that we previously solved in my organization, which we did because that sort of gives a sort of like an understanding to the candidate what type of problems may face and might have to work on after joining the company. Another thing that we did is that we added an extensive amount of context in the description of the pull request to explain really what is the purpose of the code, how the code will be used, what is the expected load, what SLA must meet. So we really try to make it as realistic as possible by adding as much context for the candidate to make informed decision on this review. And finally, in the instruction that we gave to candidate, we said, hey, candidate, you are the last obstacle between this code and production, okay? So if you say thumbs up, this code is going to be on production, and you are going to be part of an on-call rotation that is responsible 24/7 for this code. So if this code doesn't do well, at 3 a.m. your pager duty goes off, and you have to wake up and deal with that. And the reason why to do it, we do it actually for two reasons. One, is to set the expectation that here in the company, developers are responsible for operating their code too. So it gives a sort of a hint of what is the culture after joining the company. And second, also, this primes the candidate to think about operational aspects and production readiness on the code. We really wanted to look from candidates that can really think about production readiness aspect, they really care about operations. And by making this clear in the description of the assignments that operation is part actually of the code, we wanted to sort of like suggest to candidates they really need to think really hard about operational aspects of the code. And the code had a lot of operational problems, by the way. Right. Finally, I would like to add share with you some tips. Some of them that we got right at the first time, some of that we learned in the process of giving these assignments that I think might be useful for you if you decide to implement code review assignments as part of your interview process in your company. So first of all, it's been very useful for us, and that's feedback that we receive from candidates that the amount of context that we provide was really helpful for them, really help put in context the code, understand what they're supposed to look for in the PR, in the pull request, and also help removing any ambiguity, minimize any ambiguity on the expectation that we have from them. Second thing, something that seems obvious, but it's something good that we did, is be very explicit that the code really contains problem, okay? Don't say, okay, make clear that a +1 is not an acceptable request. You are supposed to find a lot of problems. And this actually serves two purposes. So one, reassures candidates they're not going to find the same quality of code after joining the company. Say, hey, look, this code is bad. We know better than that. You're not going to find the same problem, hopefully, after you join the company. And secondly, this also reassures candidates they can feel comfortable making constructive or critical comments about the code. You're not going to offend anyone. We know this code has problems. Please identify the problem. Don't feel afraid about making comments. Other two things that were probably a bit less obvious to us at the start, and we adjust in due course, is that be mindful about what I would call accidental honeypots. So at the beginning, and take responsibility for this mistake, when we came out with this pull request, we peppered it with a bunch of very obvious problems and some more subtle problems. And the initial idea is that, well, maybe candidates gives us sort of like a variety. Maybe this is something that can be scalable. Candidates a bit more experienced, less experienced can use this pull request review to successfully. But then I realized that the amount of small issues really diverted the attention of candidates over them, and end up focusing on this small issue, and they are actually missing some of the larger issues. Not because they didn't know about the issues, because when we had them mass interviewed, they immediately identified smaller issues, but this basically overload is sort of like probably caused some cognitive overload into candidates, and they tend to overly focus on small issues, missing the fact that the code actually had more subtle and more important problems. And similarly to that, another thing that we realized that limit the amount of problems you have in the code. The first iteration of the code really had too many problems and caused a bit of reviewer fatigue. Be careful about the amount of problems that you inject in the code. They should not be too much, otherwise it can confuse the reviewers, the interviewers, and the candidates might not be a great experience for them. All right, so I've been singing the praise of code review assignments for the past 20 minutes. So it also has challenges, and I'd like to describe, in my view, what I think the main challenges are in implementing code review assignments. So first of all, while I think, again, that these are something that is relatively time efficient, they still require some time to be completed, and they're not really the best tool for technical screening. This is something that is more suited later on in the review process, so a different interview method might be more suited to screen candidates early on in the process. The second thing is that if you opening a role that is language agnostic, or you're open to candidates with experience in multiple languages, this actually multiplies the effort on your side to create assignments for different candidates. Now, you can give the same problem to for different languages, but you need to basically spend time implementing the same problem for different languages, and implement the same bugs for different languages, which is something that needs to be taken into account because that costs a substantial amount of effort. And finally, this is something that I learned, that the type of assignments you give requires adjustment based on the level of seniority. As I mentioned, if you add many simple, easy to spot problems, then these end up diverting the attention of candidates, which negative effect. So if you want to use this assignment for hiring candidate a different role, you can still use the same type of assignment, but you need to basically tune the amount of problems you inject in the bugs. So if you hire for a more senior role, you may want to add only very, very subtle problems. If you are for a candidate more early in their career, probably you want to add a bit more simple role. So I don't think that you can actually use the same problem for candidates at a different stage of their careers. And that's a limitation I found out. So hopefully, in my time, I was able to persuade you about the benefits of code review assignments, and I hope you might want to consider giving it a chance in your interview. The main takeaway is that I really think that live coding and take-home assignments, which are most commonly used approaches, present major limitations. Hopefully, I was able to persuade you that some of these limitations can be addressed using code review assignments. I can say that I really have a positive experience using them in my group. People we hired had a very positive experience. People they interviewed but didn't receive an offer, they also had a positive experience. And I share with you some of the tips that might be useful for you in that process. And I thank you very much for your time. Very much appreciated.